Werewolves enjoy a fearsome reputation among monster hunters, combining strength, endurance, and raw power of an animal and cunning malevolence of a human. Indeed, a combination that shouldn't be underestimated. Hunting a werewolf requires a vast array of weapons, ranging from swords, spears, fire, and guns, loaded with silver bullets. It is quite ironic that the pop culture surrounding vampires is almost completely disconnected from the historic sources, while the werewolf lore is pretty well preserved, to a certain extent. But before we will arm ourselves against the onslaught of fleas and tangled fur, we need to explain how exactly werewolves came to being, and it is a story full of death and French kissing a wolf. And before you will ask how, I say, with passion. The foundation of the werewolf mythos is closely related to the word Koryos, which is a term used to describe a band of young warriors temporarily exiled from their society to undergo a rite of passage from adolescence to adulthood. These young men were living as hunters and raiders and were commonly adopting the traits of the wolves. This ritual formed the basis of many later stories involving humans turning into the wolves. But if you want to hear more about this topic, check out this video. Stories about humans with animal heads aren't uncommon among the ancient cultures. Egyptian mythology is rife with such deities as Anubis, with a head of the jackal, Bast, a goddess with head of a cat, or Seth, with a head of a jackal with a lot of questions about his parents. Stories about Cynocephalus, literally a dog's head, were a popular theme of legends that almost universally stemmed from the Alexander Romance from 3rd or 4th century CE. Though cynocephaly is mostly considered something different to lycanthropy, in the 8th century the homeland of dog-headed people was placed in the frozen north. It wasn't a coincidence that the warriors wearing wolf pelts and the fabled people with dogs' heads shared a common homeland. But how to fight a werewolf? Well, you need a stick. And no, not the one you will throw to this adorable heaping mass of fangs and nightmares. You need a pointy stick. A spear will do just fine. Ancient Greeks believed that the transformation into the wolf was not only possible, but quite easy. Pausanias of Damascus, a Greek geographer from 2nd or 1st century BC, described a ritual from Arcadia in which young people could change into a wolf by entering a holy spring. In order to do so, they left their clothes on tree branches and jumped into the water. After 9 years in the form of the wolf, they changed back into their original human shape, retrieved their clothes, and returned to their homes. This story was panned by Mr. No Fun Allowed, Pliny the Elder himself. Our Roman friend argued with a sly smile that after 9 years clothes wouldn't fit, not to mention that somebody would surely steal them long before the 9 years mark. The story of Arcadian werewolves is likely connected to the rituals surrounding the aforementioned Koryos, but it wasn't the only woven tale from ancient Greece. Another story tells us about a soldier who changed into a wolf and started attacking sheep in the enclosure. The werewolf was wounded with a spear in the neck, which helped in identifying the attacker because the injury carried over to his human form. Fighting the beast was just one way to deal with the werewolf. Ancient Greek, Roman and Byzantine physicians like Marcellus of Sida, Archigenes, Rufus of Ephesus, Oribasius, a personal physician of the Emperor Julian the Apostate, Paulus of Aegina, Michael Psellos, and Johannes Zacharias Actuarius considered lycanthropy a mental disease. Its symptoms involved roaming at night, imitating wolves, and lurking near the graves until dawn. The skin of a person stricken by lycanthropy is pale, their legs are bruised from falls and dog bites, their eyes and tongues are dry, and they tend to look absently into the distance. Such a disease was countered with healthy diet, baths, wet compresses, and viper venom. If a person couldn't sleep, a sleeping ointment or opium should be rubbed under the nose. Treating lycanthropy as a mental problem is quite a modern take and a rare aspect of a monster hunter profession. But you're not here for tender love and care. You are here for the slashing, stabbing, and French kissing the wolf, so let's go deeper into this topic. In the 8th century, frozen north was rumored to be a home of fierce tribes of creatures akin to humans, but with a wolf's or dog's head. Those beasts were fighting naked and covered with war paint. Their howling terrified soon-to-be-dead enemies, because werewolves often attack in the cover of the night, roaring and killing everyone in their path. Truly the worst way to spend a weekend in the countryside. Saxo Grammaticus, a historian and theologian from Denmark, mentioned an oracle which ordered warriors to feast upon animals like a wolf, by eating raw meat and drinking the blood to absorb the strength and virility of the animal. Snorri Sturluson from Iceland described warriors entering a frenzy which turned them into wild beasts. Strong as a bear or a bull, they were immune to pain and fire and entered the fight without armor. It was said that those warriors gnawed their own shields in anticipation of the bloodshed. They were called the Berserkir, literally bearshirts, and Ulfhedna, the wolfcoats. They were known for Berserkergang, a rage which transformed them into a monster of battle, a frenzied creature out of any control. Woe to the man who will face them in combat. Entering the rage made Ulfhedna stronger for a short period of time. The warriors believed that they were turning into wolves, taking their strength and fierce, unyielding nature. Although it must be noted that when the frenzy ended, they were left in a weakened state, which left them vulnerable to attacks. The Ulfhedna enjoyed a fearsome reputation equally among their enemies and allies. The warriors were famously harsh, cruel, and short-tempered. Even in a time of peace, the Ulfhedna were causing trouble by abducting women and challenging people to duels. Since they were considered elite warriors, enjoying many privileges from their rulers, it was hard to punish the Ulfhedna properly. Warriors turning into wolves are described in many sources like Hraftsmal, Hervarar saga og Heidreks Konungs, Egil's saga, Vatnsdæla saga, Grettis saga, and works of Saxo Grammaticus. Ulfhedna were imposing warriors, fearless and strong. They didn't flinch when touched by the fire, and were even able to swallow the pieces of burning coal to prove their immunity to pain. But that doesn't mean they were immune to death. Ulfhedna could be slain with sword or any other given weapon, as long as you were brave enough to come closer to the frenzied mountain of a man that wolves the Ulfhedin. During the Battle of Stamford Bridge, such a warrior was slain by a spearman who floated across the river in a barrel to stab the mighty axeman from below. It was the only way of dealing with the warrior who single-handedly stopped the Anglo-Saxon army from crossing the bridge and killed 40 men with his axe. At least that's what the story says. Volsunga saga describes the transformation of a woman into a wolf. That particular she-wolf was the mother of Sigurd, a sworn enemy of the Volsung clan. After changing into the beast, the sorceress was killing one member of the Volsung each night, leaving Sigmund for the last. The warrior smeared himself with honey, so the she-wolf started licking him instead of biting. When she stuck her tongue in his mouth, Sigmund bit it off and killed her. Kinky. Volsunga saga also states that a human could transform into an animal with the help of a wolf pelt. That ritual allowed Sigmund to understand wolves howling, but also induced a bloody rage. Thus, the hero burned the skin after returning to human form. The British Isles are rife with werewolf lore. The Irish Coir Anman mentions Laignech Faelda or Faeleda, who fathered a whole tribe of warriors who are able to change into wolves and enter a bloody rage during a battle. Akallam na Senorach not only describes a trio of werewolves, but also a good way to deal with them. 3 women were changing into wolves and wreaked havoc among the sheep around the celebration of Samhain, which marked the end of the summer and beginning of winter. The only thing that our trio of werewolves couldn't resist was music. Thus, the bard Kas Korach lured them by playing the harp, and the girls turned back into their human forms. Then, Caelte Magrunain, hero of the story, threw a spear that killed all 3 girls. Well, that was rude. Gervase of Tilbury, while creating the encyclopedia for the Emperor Otton IV, titled Otia Imperialia, wrote that people of England are frequently changing into wolves according to the phases of the moon. We have to take that account with a pinch of salt, or rather a whole truckload of salt, because Gervais only used examples from France and not England. Curious. The first tale follows the steps of an outlawed knight, Rimbaud de Puget, who has lost his mind in the forest and changed into a wolf. In the form of the animal, Rimbaud, not to confuse with Rambo, was attacking people, cows and sheep, until a lumberjack threw an axe and cut off his leg. The trauma changed the knight back into his human form and snapped him out of his wolf frenzy. Though he lost a leg, Rimbaud was grateful for the rescue. So, in case of a werewolf attack, grab an axe and hope for the best. Werewolves in Western Europe weren't always portrayed in negative light. Ballad of Bisclaveret, penned by Marie de France, showed the more sympathetic side of a werewolf. In her poem, a well-respected knight is changing into a wolf by shedding human clothes. The older version of the story involves a pair of magic rings, yet in both cases the knight is betrayed by his unfaithful wife and is forced to spend some time in the form of the enormous wolf. In the end, Bisclaveret, or Melian, is freed from the animal form and the evil wife and her lover are punished. And they lived miserably and not very long from hereafter. Another example of benevolent werewolves is described in the Irish tale of a young farmer named Connor. Our brave lad ventures deep into the forest in search of two missing cows. He stumbles upon a cottage in the woods that is the home of a werewolf family. Because Connor is a kind soul and years ago helped a wounded wolf pup get out of the ravine, he is handsomely rewarded. The next day, a wolf brings 3 beautiful cows to the Connor's farmstead. Again, here we can see a common werewolf trope, a group of males living outside of society as outcasts. But as time went on, the outcasts stopped being charming people living in the neck of woods. They were branded as heretics with fire and iron. The age of witch hunt has begun. Outcasts were hanged on the Wolfsbaum or Wolfhafet Treo, namely a wolf's tree or wolf's head tree. Sword, club, and a piece of rope was enough to deal with a werewolf. In the early modern period, Europe wasn't the place of enlightenment and tolerance. Quite the contrary. The kingdoms were struggling with the rise of wealthy merchants, the knights were replaced with rows upon rows of pikemen, and the life of a soldier was worth less than the musket he was holding. Then the continent was split by Reformation, and the bloody struggle for the souls of the mortals began. Everything that didn't fit the dogma, well, you get the idea. The accusations of witchcraft were often combined with the wolf riding, wolf charming, and lycanthropy. Often it was murderers who were treated as werewolves, and sometimes rightfully so, like in the case of Frenchman called Gilles Garnier, man who was burned at the stake for macabre murders of 4 children, and eating their flesh. Garnier was so vicious that he was able to tear the body of a boy into pieces by biting his belly. Truly a monster in human skin, that one was. Of course, he was accused of transforming into a wolf, and since he was a hermit, there was no line of defense for the werewolf of Dole. The second important case appears in the form of Peter Stump, executed on the 31st of October 1598 in Cologne. He was on trial for murder of 18 people, 14 children including his own son, and 2 pregnant women. Truly horrifying were the crimes attributed to Werewolf of Bedburg, for he cannibalized the bodies of children, eaten out the brains of his son, and ripped the unborn babies from wombs of their mothers to eat their still warm hearts. It wasn't the end of his appalling crimes. Stump also harbored an incestuous relationship with his daughter and admitted having an intercourse with a succubus sent to him from the depths of hell. Peter Stump was apprehended and executed with utmost brutality. He was tied to a wheel, his flesh was torn with red-hot pincers, and his arms and legs were broken with a blunt side of an axe. Finally, his head was cut off, and body of Werewolf of Bedburg was thrown into the fire. save for the head, which was put upon a spike above the figure of a wolf as a warning. According to his own words, Peter Stump was able to transform into a wolf using a magical belt made from wolfskin given to him by the devil himself. But all those confessions were given during torture, so Peter Stump may have been just a scapegoat for the wolf's attacks. Along with the werewolves, witches and cannibals, the persecution by the Catholics and the Protestants extended to the healers, herbalists and charmers, such as the Wolfssänger or Wolfbanner. Those people earned a living by protecting farm animals and households from, you guessed it, wolves. Those charmers were able to repel the predators with a blessing called Wolfsegen, or cause the wolf attack with a curse called Wolfbann. In the early 17th century, many Wolfssänger were executed as werewolves, though later they were persecuted just for using magic without transforming into an animal. Before we go on, we should talk more about the means of fighting a werewolf. Luckily, you will find plenty of weapons lying just around you. Spears, muskets, swords, axes, various traps, crossbows or just ordinary bows, fire, and probably chainsaws. Would all be good choices while fighting a werewolf, both in the human and animal form. Sadly, just like with the vampires, most stories don't mention the need to use extraordinary weapons just to fight a beast. Berserker and Ulfhedna could be slain with common weapons, though getting close enough to the frenzied warrior was the difficult part. Not to mention surviving your own idea. However, there is a certain kind of bullet that is said to be extremely potent against the werewolves, a silver bullet. Interestingly enough, that bit of monster lore combines 3 completely different stories into one, just like Arnulf's medical papers. Silver blades, arrows and bullets are often considered as a go-to weapon to deal with monsters of any kind. There is no self-respecting witcher or vampire hunter that goes to work without silver of any kind. In this regard, Arnulf is a very proficient henchman, as he acquires a lot of silverware from the unaware clients. In folklore and religion, silver is widely considered a symbol of purity, clarity, focus and redemption, so it isn't strange that a silver amulet or other kind of item would be useful to ward off the supernatural threat. Because silver was also a very valuable commodity, there was a notion that it also possessed some supernatural abilities. Funnily enough, the idea of silver weapon isn't as old as you might think. First of all, pure silver is quite a soft metal, and forging a weapon out of it would be just a waste of material. More sturdy sterling or coin silver used to create silverware or money is still soft enough to be cut with iron or bronze. Also, silver is quite dense, which would make even the moderately sized weapon pretty heavy. Also, the cost of silver sword or even silver-coated blade would be too expensive for any practical user. That is why this silvery metal was relegated to the silversmith instead of a weaponsmith. One way to explain the silver bullet prominence is a story of Jean Chastel, the man responsible for slaying the infamous beast of Givaudan. It was said that the hunter used silver bullets to slay the werewolf, which was impervious to a standard ammunition made from lead. However, this story is taken from a 1858 novel La Bite de Givaudan by Elie Barthé, where Chastel is firing a bent silver coin instead of a bullet. Another novel, this time from 1946, Histoire fidèle de la Bite de Givaudan by Henri Pourot, describes how the hunter melts silver medallions depicting Virgin Mary and turns them into bullets that ended the werewolf's life. But those accounts are coming from the novels, yet there is a grain of truth in them. In folklore, stories and legends, magic is bound by certain rules, and just like with the tax law, with every rule comes a loophole. The magic curse will often have a clause that could be exploited in order to defeat the villain. That creates a wonderful moment where an evildoer, who is constantly bragging about his invincibility, is outsmarted by a hero. Among the notable examples of such a loophole is of course True Love's Kiss, and "no man can kill me, I am no man" exchange from The Lord of the Rings. And yes, I know that in the book it is phrased differently, but perhaps the most influential trick of wording comes from William Shakespeare's Macbeth, in the form of prophecy stating that Macbeth cannot be hurt by any man born of a woman. Thus, he is killed by Macduff, who came to the world by a C-section. Apart from the problematic statement that the children delivered by a C-section aren't born, Macbeth perfectly illustrates how the rules of magic can be bypassed. So, if a werewolf cannot be killed with ordinary bullet, a hunter must use an object that wasn't meant to be a bullet, a button for example, or molten silver medallions. The idea of a bulletproof creature came to being with an advent of firearms. Because of relatively low muzzle velocity of early gunpowder weapons, it wasn't uncommon that soldiers found bullets lodged between the layers of armor or clothing. Some even jokingly referred to them as berries, while throwing them out of boots and gloves. Such stories gave birth to the notion that some officers or generals cannot be killed by a normal bullet, just like the werewolf. During the 30 Years' War, some generals were called a fext, a remorseless being, impervious to normal bullets save for the glass ones. Even in the 18th century, the belief in bulletproof generals was still strong, just like in the case of Swedish monarch Charles XII and his mysterious death during the siege of Fredrikshald. Though it is the most probable that the king was killed by a grape shot, there is a theory involving an assassin using extraordinary ammunition, a silver bullet or leaden-coated one to be exact. Regardless of whether this theory is real, Carolus Rex indeed enjoyed the reputation of an invincible man. Considering beliefs at the time, it isn't such a far-fetched idea that the shooter would use a silver bullet to ensure the success of assassination. The notion that a werewolf can just shrug off the wounds and keep fighting can be related to something more than a legendary battle frenzy of Berserker and Ulfhedna. Peter Stump confessed that he received the magic belt from Satan, which allowed him to transform into a wolf. This unassuming item is just a small part of his story, but you know how the saying goes. The devil is in the details. It must be mentioned that the witnesses of werewolf attacks sometimes stated that the monster resembled a wolf, but wasn't exactly the same. Of course, fear could exaggerate the size and strength of the beast, but generally speaking, people living in the past knew how the wolf looked and behaved. In most cases, they were treated as dangerous but rather shy and skittish animals. Werewolves, on the other hand, were unafraid of humans and enjoyed looking for easy prey among the homesteads. A lone wolf relentlessly stalking a young maid in the Red Hood? Such a behavior was a clear sign of some dark machinations and showed that predator wasn't an ordinary animal. Today we know that one of the explanations for unusual behavior of wolf could be rabies, like in the case of Beast of Sarlat. But what about the witnesses who saw a difference between the common wolf and the beast? Dogs were the companions of mankind throughout the millennia. Their agility, ferociousness and ability to learn proved to be valuable assets for hunters, shepherds and soldiers. The conquistadors used massive breeds of mastiffs to subjugate the native people of America. The most famous of those animals was Bakerillo, literally a bull's calf, which describes the size of the dog quite well. This reddish battle-scarred mastiff is important for one more reason. The dogs trained to hunt and attack were protected by a leather armor, often made from boar's hide. It is no coincidence that some witnesses mentioned unusual coat of fur that was more similar to boar than to the wolf, as well as belt or buttons on belly of the werewolf. An armor made of boar hide would provide additional protection against bullets and blades. Moreover, additional layer of skin would explain the difference in appearance between a wolf and an attack dog. However, the idea that some of the werewolf cases could be ascribed to the hunting or attack dogs raises another question. Contrary to the wolf, a trained hunting dog is not afraid of humans and knows that the farms are a good place to find an easy prey. Such attacks could be the work of escaped animals or dogs who were simply overtaken by their instincts. After all, those weren't exactly cuddly puppies. But there is another possibility. Such animals could be released on purpose by somebody who took joy from murder and mutilation. In 1777, Marianne Thomas was attacked in her home in the village of Cross, just a few kilometers south of Saugues in France. Assailant was dressed in animal skins and wore fur gloves to pretend he was a wolf. Sadly, Marianne died from wounds few days later, yet the murderer was caught and executed. Cases of Nicolas Damont, Jean Grenier, and Manuel Blanco Romasanta were connected by accusations of being a werewolf. That last name is especially interesting because Manuel Blanco Romasanta was a first recorded Spanish serial killer and the only instance in Spanish law when court case was conducted to investigate a case of lycanthropy. Manuel Blanco Romasanta claimed that he wasn't responsible for his actions because he was cursed and committed 13 murders in the form of the wolf alongside 2 other werewolves. The judges weren't convinced, and Romasanta was sentenced to be executed with a garrote. However, his punishment was later changed by Queen Isabella II to life imprisonment. As you can see, hunting the werewolves has less to do with tracking an elusive monster in the heart of an ancient forest, and more to do with a monster that lies within the human soul. Thank you for listening, and I hope to see you next time.